The twin moons of Varelia lit up the skies in eerie silence as the capital city prepared for war. The towers, once glowing with royal light, were now draped in armor and dust. Alien soldiers lined the gates with grim eyes and heavier hearts. Their queen stood tall among them, wearing obsidian armor that shimmered like a storm in motion. Her name was Sarathis, the last battle queen of the Zalari, a proud race known for strength and honor. But now her people were few, her empire shattered by a nameless invader from the galactic edge. No warning had come. The first explosion took the eastern sky, the second broke the mountains. By nightfall, a dozen cities were already ash. Their enemy came not with diplomacy or declaration. They came with machines shaped like nightmares, burning through atmosphere and mercy. Sarathis rallied her warriors not out of hope, but because surrender was not a word her tongue could shape. She would fight as her ancestors did until breath left her body. Most of her generals had fallen in the first week. Their once vast army was reduced to a few thousand bloodied survivors. Communications were dead. Reinforcements would never arrive. As her scouts returned with burned maps and broken bones, she whispered to herself that they would not die without glory. But on the 15th day, something strange happened. The enemy paused, the sky cleared, no attacks, no scouts. Only the wind moved. Some feared a trap. Others prayed for a miracle. Sarathis ordered her troops to remain hidden, weapons drawn, hearts quiet. It was in this silence that he arrived. The first to see him was a wounded scout dragging herself across the dirt. A lone figure stepped down from the hills wearing battered armor not made from Zalari steel. His stance was calm, as if the battlefield were a garden. He carried a simple rifle and eyes that had seen too much. At first, Sarathis thought him a ghost. Then she thought him mad. A human, alone, walking through scorched land toward the enemy's territory without fear. When her guards captured him and brought him before her, he simply bowed and said, "I heard your signal. I came to help." She didn't believe him. How could she? No other race had responded. No ally answered their distress calls. The humans were supposed to be locked behind neutrality pacts. Yet here he stood, a soldier with no flag, no backup, and no intention of leaving. He looked her in the eyes and said, "I know what loss tastes like. Let me fight." His name was Kale Voss. Records would later show he had been part of a forgotten unit, a division disbanded years ago. But the man in front of her looked nothing like a deserter. He spoke like a warrior and moved like a storm held in flesh. Sarathis gave him a test one he passed with blood and silence. She sent him into the ravine where 6 of her best had fallen. Days ago, he came back dragging the enemy's drone corps and carrying one of her dead soldiers on his back. No medals, no speech, just action. That night, around the fireless camp, even the most broken warriors whispered his name. Kale did not ask for command. He did not preach, he listened. He learned their tactics, their losses, their culture. He trained beside them, ate their food, and stood watch when others collapsed. Sarathis, once alone at the top of a dying army, now found herself glancing toward the human during every meeting. Still, the enemy was closing in. Their machines had paused only to evolve new models, deadlier shapes. The sky flickered with incoming signatures. Final battle was near. Everyone felt it in their bones. Sarathis gathered her warriors and gave a speech not of hope, but of fire. And ending, she asked for those who would stand beside her to step forward. Kale was the first to move. The battlefield stretched far and wide, blackened by old fire and broken machines. Smoke still danced in the wind like ghosts searching for a place to rest. Each crater told a story of pain, and every broken weapon whispered of sacrifice. The Zalari had spilled much to protect this ground. Sarathis walked the ridge in silence. Her armor bore new dents, scratches from recent battles. She did not flinch. Her glowing eyes scanned the horizon with the calm of someone who had nothing left to lose. Kale walked behind her, not speaking, just watching the terrain the way a hunter watches a wounded beast. They had scouted all night. The enemy had returned. Their ships now hovered low behind the canyons, recharging, recalibrating, and preparing. No warning, no mercy. Only purpose. Sarathis clenched her fist as she marked their positions into the dust with a piece of shattered blade. Kale knelt beside her. His human eyes saw differently. He noticed patterns in the enemy's formation, weak points in their front lines, blind spots in the air patrols. He pointed to one area where the cliff offered shadow and cover. Sarathis narrowed her eyes, surprised by his strategy. "You've done this before," she said, not as a question but a truth. Kale didn't respond with words, he just nodded. His mind wasn't on glory, it was on survival. He wasn't there to be remembered, he was there to help others live. Sarathis respected that more than any medal. Back at camp, the soldiers gathered. Wounds were bandaged, blades were sharpened. Food was rationed and shared without complaint. Even in this hopeless silence, Kale's presence had started to change them. Some stood straighter. Others smiled again. Sarathis watched it all unfold. Like a flicker of light in a dying flame, that night, she called a meeting beneath the shattered tree that had once marked the royal garden. The roots were burned, the leaves were gone, but it still stood, a reminder of what had been and what they must protect. Her warriors circled her without speaking. Kale stood among them as one of their own. "This will be our last stand," Sarathis said. "We don't have numbers, ships, or reinforcements. But we have each other. We are not fighting to win. We are fighting so that our enemies remember what happens when you try to erase the Zilari." She pointed to the cliffs Kale had scouted. "We will strike here, silent, swift. If we fall loud enough to echo into their world. Let them know this planet will never kneel." There were no cheers, only firm nods. Soldiers gripped their weapons tighter. Eyes met with grim resolve. Kale leaned in and quietly offered to take the front scout position. Sarathis looked at him long before answering. Then she gave a single nod and handed him her old banner. Dawn came harsh and red. The sky bled with light as clouds shifted over the cliffs. Kale moved ahead of the group like a shadow with purpose. He touched the ground gently, each step guided by instinct and training. Behind him, the warriors followed, their hearts steady and minds clear. As they climbed the slope, Kale paused. He heard a low hum, enemy drones. Too close. He waved the squad down and drew a strange-looking device from his pack. Sarathis had never seen it before. It blinked once, then sent out a pulse that scrambled the drone's sensors without a sound. The path was clear. They reached the top of the cliff where the enemy's outer defense was thinner than expected. Below them, monstrous machines charged with blue light, unaware of the danger above. Kale looked back. Sarathis gave the signal. They struck like lightning. Explosives dropped. Blades fell. Screams echoed across the valley. The machines reacted too slowly. For the first time in weeks, the enemy faltered. Kale fought like a ghost. In fire, moving through metal and flame, as if he had trained for this exact moment, Sarathis fought beside him. Her blade sang through steel. Her roar carried across the canyon. Together they were fury shaped into motion. Where she struck hard, Kale struck fast. Where she covered ground, he found the gaps. Their rhythm became a storm. More enemies arrived. The second wave hit harder. Explosions rocked the cliffs. Sarathis was knocked back by a shockwave, but rose again. She turned and saw Kale standing in front of her, shield raised, smoke curling around his armor. He didn't move aside. He didn't run. He just stood his ground. He had taken the front line. The dust was thick in the air, turning the morning sky into a canvas of fire and smoke. Kale's boots scraped against broken rock as he held the shield steady. Enemy fire rained down around him, but he didn't flinch. Behind him, Sarathis rose. From the ground, her breath sharp and focused, she looked at him not with surprise, but with understanding. In that moment, there were no species, no titles, no difference. Just two warriors back to back, facing what the galaxy had thrown at them. She reached for her fallen weapon and gave a silent nod toward the next wave. Kale moved like a blade through water. His steps were sure, calculated. He weaved through wreckage, striking with precision. He didn't scream. He didn't curse. He just fought. Sarathis followed him with fire in her blood, her blade a streak of silver under the dying sun. The enemy had evolved. Their newer units were faster, smarter. They adapted quickly, changing formations with every blow. Sarathis had fought these machines for weeks, but now she saw something new. They weren't just soldiers. They were learning from her. Still, Kale's unpredictability confused them. His Earth tactics, jumps, rolls, misdirection, threw their sensors off. One drone aimed at his chest. He ducked and slid beneath it, driving his blade into its core. The machine spasmed and collapsed, sparks flying across the stone. Sarathis called out for a charge. Her troops surged forward. The cliffs became a battlefield of screams and roars. She cut down a two-headed brute with a clean strike to the spine. Kale rushed to pull a pinned soldier from the wreckage of a fallen tower. Time moved like lightning. The ridge became unstable. Enemy tanks fired into the base of the cliffs, causing tremors. The ground cracked underfoot. Sarathis shouted orders for retreat, but not all could move. One squad was trapped beyond a burning trench. Kale didn't wait. He leapt the gap, landing with a grunt on the other side. He lifted a fallen beam with raw strength. 3 Zelari warriors crawled out. One had lost an arm. Kale carried him without hesitation, shielding the others as they scrambled across the broken edge. Behind them, the structure finally collapsed. Dust rose like a curtain as they barely escaped the fall. As the sun dipped lower, the battle slowed. The enemy was not defeated, but they had pulled back again, maybe to recharge, maybe to rethink. Sarathis ordered her soldiers to regroup in the ruins of the High Sanctuary. It was once a temple. Now it was broken stone and scorched symbols. Inside the sanctuary, wounded lay in rows. The smell of burned metal and blood filled the air. Kale helped set up defense barriers while Sarathis checked on her warriors. Some were beyond saving. Others clutched their blades even in sleep. She paused beside a young fighter missing both legs. The girl looked up at Sarathis with wide eyes. "Did we win?" she asked. Sarathis didn't answer. She placed her hand over the girl's chest and nodded once. The warrior smiled and closed her eyes. Sarathis stood there for a long time, unmoving. Kale approached her later with a datapad in hand. He had scanned the enemy tech from the last attack. "They're not just machines," he said. "There's organic code mixed in, neural commands. Someone's guiding them from a hive brain buried deep." Sarathis processed the words carefully. "So if we find the core, we end the war?" she asked. Kale didn't promise victory. He only pointed to the coordinates he'd mapped on the pad, deep underground, beneath the ruins of their lost capital. The heart of the storm. It was a death mission, but there was no fear in her eyes. She called her remaining captains. She gave orders to protect the sanctuary at all cost. Then she chose 10 of the finest left, Kale included, and told them to prepare. They would strike at the root. As they readied supplies and checked gear, Kale sat alone for a moment beside the broken statue of a Zelari god. He stared at the stars above, barely visible through the smoke. He didn't pray. He just remembered Earth, the fields, his family, and the silence that had come after war. Sarathis joined him. She didn't speak either. Together, they looked toward the horizon where the hive brain waited. 2 warriors, 1 cause. No retreat. The final march had begun. The tunnel beneath the ruins was older than memory itself. It had been carved by ancestors of the Zalari long before the age of machines. Now it echoed with the sound of boots and breath as Sarathis and her strike team moved through the darkness with blades drawn in hearts. Steady. Kale led the front with a compact light strapped to his chest. Its beam cut through dust and silence. Every few steps he paused to scan for traps or motion. Behind him, warriors kept close, their footsteps as quiet as whispers. The air grew heavier with each descent. Faded carvings lined the walls. They spoke of forgotten wars and ancient gods. Sarathis touched one with her fingers, reading the symbols in silence. It was a story of a queen who fell protecting her people. Kale glanced back, catching her pause, but said nothing. Far below, sensors picked up faint power signatures pulsing like a heartbeat. The hive brain was near. They reached a wide chamber lit faintly by the glow of enemy machinery. Tubes lined the walls. Thick cables pulsed with life. In the center stood a massive core, alive and humming with cruel intelligence. Kale crouched behind cover and raised 2 fingers. Sarathis nodded, and the team split into positions. They placed explosives, checked their weapons, and waited for the signal. But before Kale could count down, something hissed in the shadows. A new sound, wet and sharp. Not mechanical. From the walls emerged creatures, part machine, part flesh. Twisted forms crawling with metal claws and breathing with mouths that clicked like bones snapping. They attacked with speed no one expected. The first warrior fell with a scream before raising his blade. Chaos exploded in an instant. Kale fired his rifle, aiming for the exposed joints. Sarathis met the enemy head-on, her blade moving faster than thought. Sparks flew with every strike. One of the beasts lunged at Kale's throat. He ducked, rolled, and drove a knife into its chest. Black fluid sprayed across his arm. The strike team held formation, circling together to avoid being picked off. "Don't scatter," Sarathis shouted. "Back to back." Kale covered her flank as 3 more creatures charged. They moved like shadows given form, shrieking in unnatural tones. He gunned 2 down. The third met Sarathis's blade and split apart in midair. They couldn't last long in the open. Kale pointed toward a raised platform above the core. "There," he shouted. "Better position." They fought their way up, step by bloody step. One warrior was pulled over the edge by a clawed hand. Another lost her leg, but kept firing through. Pain. When they reached the top, Kale activated the explosives remotely. A low pulse echoed through the core chamber. The enemy beasts shrieked and backed away, sensing the danger. Sarathis stabbed a final drone through its eye and looked down at the flickering brain beneath them. "It's not enough," Kale said, scanning the countdown. "The core's shield is absorbing the blast." He wiped blood from his face and pulled a second device from his belt. "This one has to go in manually, beneath the shield plate." Sarathis understood what that meant. There was no exit once the second charge was placed. The time wouldn't be enough. "I'll do it," she said without hesitation. Kale turned to her sharply. "No, you're the queen. Your people need you. Let me do it." For a moment, the chamber stood still. All the pain, the war, the fire, they hung between them like a breath. Sarathis finally stepped back and placed her hand over his chest. "You're not Zalari," she whispered, "but you carry our soul. Make this strike worthy of legend." Kale nodded once and jumped down from the platform. The creatures had vanished, hiding in the shadows again. He raced across the floor, reached the base of the core, and ripped open a hatch. Inside, wires and pulsating nerves dripped like veins. He pushed the device deep into its center. The countdown began. 5 seconds. 4. He looked up once, locking. Eyes with Sarathis. No words. Just firelight and understanding. The platform shook violently as the charge detonated. A wave of pure light consumed the room. The hive brain split in half like an egg under thunder. Above, the enemy ships in orbit staggered and crashed. Machines everywhere went still. The command had been severed. The war machine was dead. But Kale did not return. Sarathis fell to her knees, staring down into the ruined chamber below. The chamber below was quiet now. The flickering lights of the hive core had faded into nothing. The walls that once pulsed with life now stood lifeless. Sarathis stared down into the broken pit where Kale had vanished. There was no movement. No sound, just silence wrapped in ash and ruin. Her warriors stood behind her in stunned stillness. No one spoke, no one dared. The human had walked into death and taken the war machine with him. The cost had been heavy, but the result was undeniable. Across the stars, the enemy's grip had shattered like glass. Sarathis slowly descended into the hollow chamber. Her boots echoed against the broken floor. The edges of the explosion were still hot. Smoke curled around her legs. The air carried the sharp scent of melted steel and burnt flesh. Yet she continued forward with steady steps. She found the remains of the core, split in two like a cracked heart. Around it were pieces of armor, a crushed rifle, and a single blood-marked dog tag. She bent down and picked it up. The letters were still clear. Kale Voss. Her hand closed tightly around it. A deep ache rose in her chest. She had lost many soldiers, friends, even family. But this felt different. Kale had arrived from nowhere, fought with no promise, and died without asking for anything. He had given them hope. He had given her a reason to keep breathing. One of her warriors approached, limping badly. "My queen," he said softly. "Enemy ships are crashing. Their systems are failing. We are free." His voice trembled at the last word. It didn't feel real yet. They had survived for so long with death at their heels that freedom felt like a stranger. Sarathis rose and looked around at the shattered core. Then she looked up, toward the cracked ceiling where daylight now poured through like divine fire. Her voice was strong when she spoke. "Then we carry him with us. His memory will stand taller than our statues." They climbed out of the chamber together, step by step, broken but alive. Outside, the sky was clearing. Enemy machines littered the horizon like fallen giants. Fires still burned in some corners, but they no longer spread. The war was ending. The galaxy would remember how it ended. News spread quickly. Allied worlds that had stayed silent during the invasion now reached out with shame and offers of aid. The humans sent envoys with questions and confusion. No order had ever dispatched Kale. No mission listed his name. He had acted alone. When they heard what he had done, they offered full honors and military rights. But Sarathis refused. His blood was not spilled for ceremony, she said. It was spilled for us. His grave is here. His story is ours now. A week passed. The dead were mourned. The wounded were tended. The ruins were rebuilt slowly. Sarathis did not rest. She worked with her people, carrying stone and food and lifting spirits where she could. Her strength came not from duty, but from Kale's sacrifice. In the center of the sanctuary, where once stood the broken statue of a Zilari god, they built a new monument. It was not large or ornate, just a tall piece of black stone, carved with the image of a human and a Zilari queen standing side by side, facing the stars. At the base were his dog tags, sealed in crystal. Above them were words in both Zilari and human language. He came alone. He died with us. He lives forever. The people gathered around it each evening, lighting torches and whispering stories of the battle. Children began asking about the man in the armor. Elders told the tale with pride. Songs were written in his name, not because he was perfect, but because he had stood when no one else would. That made him eternal in their eyes. One night, Saratha stood alone at the monument, her hand resting on the stone. She didn't cry. She didn't need to. Her strength had become something deeper now. The strength to lead, to remember, to carry the light forward in his absence. The stars above were brighter that night. Rebuilding was not just about stone and steel. It was about trust. After years of war and isolation, the Zalari had to learn how to speak without fear. The burned cities began to echo with music again. The sky, once filled with smoke, opened to bright stars without the shadows of enemy ships. Saratha spent every day walking among her people. She helped raise walls. She shared meals with workers. She held children in her arms and promised them peace. The crown no longer weighed her down. It guided her forward. And every step she took reminded her of the human who had made it possible. The allied planets began to arrive. Some sent engineers. Others sent medicine. But all of them sent apologies. The war had shown them what silence could cost. The Zalari accepted the help with open eyes. They trusted no promise, only action. Saratha's welcomed aid, but never forgot those who had watched them burn. A new council was formed. This time, Saratha made sure it included voices from all ranks. Not just generals and nobles, survivors, farmers, mechanics, anyone who had lost something and still chose to stand. They met in the open, beneath the stars. The same stars Kale had once watched in silence. One day, as Saratha addressed the council, a message arrived from Earth. A small diplomatic ship had entered orbit, requesting permission to land. It carried no weapons, only a crew of 5 and a sealed container marked with Earth's military seal. Saratha ordered their landing with caution and respect. The ship touched down near the sanctuary. Its crew stepped out slowly, nervous but proud. Their leader was an older woman with sharp eyes and a firm voice. "I am Commander Lyra Voss," she said. "I came for my brother." The air stilled. Saratha stepped forward and met her eyes. "He was not ours by blood," she said, "but he died our brother, and he will be remembered as a son of this soil." Lyra opened the container. Inside was Kale's original armor, cleaned and restored. Alongside it was a folded Earth flag and a recorded message. "He recorded this before leaving Earth," Lyra explained. "We didn't know where he had gone until now. He said if he didn't return, his words should find those he fought for." They brought the recording to the central plaza. The entire city gathered. The monument stood behind them, tall and silent. As the device activated, Kale's voice filled the square. It was calm, steady, full of the same quiet strength he had carried into battle. "If you're hearing this, then I'm likely gone," his voice said. "That's fine. I didn't come to survive. I came to do what was right. The Zalari don't need a hero. They just needed someone to stand beside them. If I did that, then I did enough." The crowd stood frozen. Children clutched their parents. Veterans lowered their heads. Saratha watched without blinking. Her hands stayed at her sides, clenched with quiet pride. Kale's voice continued. "Remember this. War doesn't shape who we are. How we choose to fight does. Protect what matters, even if it costs you everything." When the recording ended, there was no applause. Only silence. The kind of silence that lives forever in the bones. Saratha stepped forward and placed the Earth flag at the base of the monument. "He did what none dared," she said. "He became part of us without asking for anything." That night, the sky over Varelia glowed with lights as the Zalari and humans launched a shared beacon into orbit. It carried Kale's story encoded in a crystal cube. Anyone who passed through their system would see the light. A warning, a tribute, a promise. Peace was not guaranteed. There were still threats across the stars, but now they would face them together. The humans and the Zalari had bled together. And from that blood, something stronger had grown. not a treaty. A bond. Kale had started something greater than himself. Time passed like breath between battles. The Zalari began to thrive again. Schools reopened in old stone halls. Markets buzzed with life. Children ran through the streets without fear. The scars of war remained, but now they were worn with pride. Instead of pain, the monument to Kale became a place of reflection and guidance. Warriors would kneel before it before leaving on patrol. Elders would sit near its base and tell the next generation what courage looked like. His name had become a part of their language, a word for honor given freely. Sarathis remained queen. But her rule had shifted. She no longer sat on high thrones or wore heavy crowns. She ruled from the ground, shoulder to shoulder with her people. When decisions were made, she looked not for applause, but for wisdom. Her strength was no longer only in battle. One morning, her advisors brought news of distant skirmishes along the star line. Remnants of the enemy fleet, broken and directionless, had begun to attack trade routes. They were not organized. They were desperate. But still, they were dangerous. The council argued for defense. Some wanted to close borders. Others demanded revenge. Sarathis listened to them all, then stood in silence. When the room quieted, she spoke with a calm voice. "We will not run. We will not seek blood. We will stand. And we will protect what we have built." She formed a new fleet. Not a weapon of conquest, but a shield of peace. Human captains volunteered to join Zalari pilots. Together, they flew under a shared banner, a silver sun rising between two outstretched wings. It was called the Voss Unity Fleet, in Kale's honor. Their ships were faster, their tech smarter. Human design met Zalari power in every frame. Training drills echoed with mixed voices shouting together. No one was judged by species, only by courage. For many, it was the first time they had trusted an outsider with their life. Sarathis visited the fleet often. She walked their decks, she trained with their soldiers. Her presence reminded them that leadership meant more than words. In her armor, she stood beside new warriors and showed them how to move as one body. During one of her visits, she entered the Unity Hall, a room aboard the flagship where names of the fallen were etched into dark crystal walls. She ran her fingers over Kale's name. Above it hung a large image of him, recreated from memory and fragments. He looked alive, calm, ready. A young human pilot approached her. His voice trembled as he spoke. "Your Majesty, I didn't know him, but I joined because of him. I read his story every day before my shift." Sarathis placed her hand on the pilot's shoulder and smiled. "Then you carry him further than I ever could." That night, the fleet launched its first long-range mission. Not to attack, but to establish safe corridors between wounded worlds. They brought supplies. They defended convoys. They offered help where once there had only been fear. For many species, it was the first time they had seen Zalari and humans side by side in peace. Some doubted the alliance. Whispers of betrayal moved through jealous systems. But every time someone tried to divide them, the Voss fleet answered. Not with fire, but with unity. Enemies came expecting chaos. They left witnessing balance. Back on Varelia, the capital's heart beat steady. The gardens bloomed again, and wind moved gently through the rebuilt towers. In the queen's chambers, Sarathis kept few treasures. Among them, Kale's dog tags rested on the stone beside her window. Touched by the morning light, she often sat there alone, watching the sky. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. But when the stars blinked above, her eyes always found the brightest. It was the same one he had stared at the night before the final mission. A full year had passed since the core was destroyed. The galaxy no longer held its breath. Trade moved freely between stars. Borders once guarded with fear were now watched with purpose. The Voss Unity fleet continued to grow, a living legacy carved in the shape of sacrifice. The Queen's home, once scarred by fire and loss, had become a place of learning. Diplomats arrived to study peace instead of war. Scientists from Earth and Varelia worked side by side. New engines were built, new ideas were born. The memory of blood had not faded. But it no longer ruled them. Sarathis stood on the upper balcony of the high spire, watching children run in the courtyard far below. They wore ribbons braided with silver threads, symbols of unity. She closed her eyes and listened, not for danger, but for laughter. It had returned to her world, and it stayed. Inside her private chamber, a message pulsed on her console. The encryption was human. The origin was unexpected. She tapped the screen, and the image of a soldier appeared. The face was aged, weathered, but familiar. Her heart skipped as she stared. The message began slowly. Queen Sarathis, if you're hearing this, it means the records finally reached you. My name is Captain Thorne. I was Kale Voss's commanding officer before his discharge. He vanished from our records 5 years ago. But he left something with me before he went. The screen flickered and another recording loaded. This time, the voice was unmistakable. Kale. He looked younger, tired, but clear-eyed. If you're seeing this, I'm likely gone, but maybe not. I built a failsafe. My body was scanned into the emergency life preservation net. If the explosion didn't fully consume the chamber, the system might have worked. Sarathis leaned closer, her breath caught in her chest. Kale continued. I don't know if I'll wake, but if I do, I'll try to find you. If not, let this message remind you peace is worth dying for. And if I live, I'll spend every breath protecting it again. The console beeped again. Attached was one final line of text. Coordinates. A location deep beneath the surface of a nearby moon. A human science ship had picked up strange signals from within the crust. Biological, faint, but steady. A pulse with a name. Sarathis didn't wait. She assembled a team and departed within the hour. The ship cut through space like an arrow. Every second burned in her blood. The moon loomed ahead, pale and scarred. They landed near a crack in the rock, exactly where the signal was strongest. Beneath the surface, they followed heat trails and faint energy paths. The tunnels were tight, old, forgotten, but something in them pulsed with warmth. At last they reached a sealed pod half covered in stone. The surface glowed weakly. A handprint panel blinked slowly. She placed her hand on it without hesitation. The pod hissed. Steam poured out. Lights flickered inside, and then movement. A flicker of fingers, a breath. The lid rose with a soft hiss. Inside lay Kale, older, pale, but alive, his eyes opened slowly. They found her through the mist. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he whispered, voice hoarse and quiet. Told you I wasn't done yet. She dropped to her knees beside him, hand gripping his shoulder. Her face didn't break, but her voice did. Welcome home, soldier. The team lifted him out with care. Medics moved quickly. He was weak, but stable. His heart still beat. His mind was intact. And his presence, once only a story carved in stone, was now living again among those who had never forgotten. Back on Varelia, the bells rang for the first time in a generation. Not for war, not for mourning, but for return. The monument remained untouched, but beside it now stood a second figure. Kale, alive, breathing, watching the world he had saved. The queen stood beside him during the ceremony. She didn't speak of destiny or prophecy. She only spoke of choice, of one man who chose to stand when the galaxy turned away, of one bond that outlived fire. And as the stars lit the sky once more, the human and the alien stood side by side beneath their shared sun, together again.